Uh, Despite the three ring circus intro, this should be a pretty good live stream, I think. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what the conscious revolution is. Somebody sent me kind of a hostile message a few weeks ago, basically accusing me of trying to become a cult leader or something, um, and asking me like why, like what is it that you're trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And um, part of the reason I'm addressing this specifically is that I kind of agree with one of the points this woman made, that, she's like, don't you think you could be doing more harm than good in terms of, for example, rehabilitating the image of psychedelics and transforming public opinion? Because, I have videos about the Gnostic Lucifer myth and the Illuminati and Freemasonry, and I talk about Crowley a lot and all these things that a lot of people consider very dark. But I do that because I think these things have been intentionally demonized, that a lot of it has been misrepresented intentionally, because, for example, the mystery schools, as far as I can tell, are just sort of a repository of occult knowledge, knowledge of consciousness, really might be a better way to term it, that is really empowering. For example, Aleister Crowley, he advised people to practice yoga diligently, to alter their consciousness with, at the time, all he really had access to was nitrous oxide and mescaline and evil things like heroin and cocaine. But, in his defense, they didn't know that. They didn't, heroin was new, and it was not even a street drug. It was something that was sold by Sears and Roebuck. It was manufactured by Bayer Pharmaceuticals. People had no idea what they were getting into until it was too late. And so I don't want to diverge too much, but I guess I'm just saying that I know it's like, sometimes I think people think that I just have no self-awareness and I don't realize how people are going to potentially these things. And I'm acutely aware of that. And the thing is, I make a conscious choice to do it anyways, because I really do believe that the adepts of the mystery schools did compile the most powerful and efficacious techniques and practices under one roof. And I think the demonization of, for example, the Illuminati even is intentional. It's sort of the intent is to dissuade people from acquiring the knowledge and power that is available to them in these sources. And so, um, uh, I would love to, but once we set up the live stream, I can't change it. So we're just stuck with this for now. Again, thanks for your patience. We're just trying to figure out how to make this work better with our limited resources here in Ecuador. So, at any rate, what what is happening, I think, is that speaking of the mystery schools and ancient mysticism, these ideas like the that presented in the Kabbalion, that the all is mind, this idea that has come to be associated with Hermeticism, and is really sort of a different brand of panpsychism, the concept that the universe is fundamentally conscious, that on the chaotic energy that then manifests as geometry and relation and the things that give rise to creation. Uh, and so, along those lines, I have a friend in Holland who is very much aware of my um, struggle to find ways to articulate, as a layman, what I know to be a reality that could be verified scientifically, but I don't always have the language, and I certainly don't have the mathematical capacity to translate, for example, the San Pedro vision, that's demonstrating to me how these like little units of consciousness or photons that are also tesseracts are somehow giving rise to to the universe. That doesn't. I mean, it's a very difficult to translate that kind of subjective experience into something objective. And so my friend sent me this article the other day, uh, and the gist of it is that, oh, by the way, if you read my blog, there's a link to the article in the blog. So you can find that link to my blog in the description. But it's a neuroscience magazine, and these astrophysicists were observing galaxies And they have noticed all of these insane correlations that not only do galaxies build themselves in ways that reflect the ways that neuronal systems build themselves, uh, there are all sorts of as above, so below type corollaries. For example, the percentage of dark matter in the galaxies reflects the ratio of water to gray matter in the brain. The tendrils, the actual technical name is escaping me here, but yeah, well, let's say like tendrils that connect the bunches of neurons are also reflected in the structures of these galaxies. The number of stars roughly reflects the number of neurons in the brain in a lot of these galaxies, and so on and so forth. And I would go so far as to say that what they are observing in these galaxies is a reflection of like the vision that I had with San Pedro, because it is consciousness that is the organizing principle that is imposing structure upon this chaos. Um, I, that actually just came to me one day when I was driving around in the car thinking about this stuff, and his voice was just like, God is the organizing principle. It's just consciousness. And all these years later, there have been a lot of developments in different fields of science that have correlated with all this. And so to tie this into the idea of like a conscious revolution or grounding this out in some kind of pragmatic, actionable, ideas. Uh, I think that having a conscious understanding of the fundamental workings of the universe and our own minds is a huge portal to affecting the kind of transformation that we need to see in the world. We understand that our thoughts are capable of changing the brain structurally. That's how we learn. And so, the argument has often been made against magic that, even though I can move my hand, which is made of matter with a thought, it doesn't mean that I can move a plate in the same way. But the reality is that consciousness is nowhere. It's not like we know how it's connected to the matter in our brains that it is configuring, and it's configuring all of this in accordance with our will. And so, um, long story sort of short, because we do have other subjects to get to, other questions to answer. Um, Understanding the power of neurogenesis, which is or catalyzing neurogenesis, increasing or enhancing our neurogenesis, uh, um, enhancing or increasing our neuroplasticity, so our ability to generate new neural pathways and to restore plasticity to the ones that have already been created, is the key to creating the world that we wish to exist in. And so this as above, so below, microcosm, macrocosm kind of concept, it starts with the individual. If we heal our individual traumas, if we rewrite bad programs, if we use our breath and we use the plant spirits, or however you like to think of them, in order to resolve our interference patterns, which are fear, trauma, self-doubt, sabotaging patterns, right? This will transfer from the microcosmic individual to the macrocosmic collective, right? This is how we heal society at large, and we are in a position where our responsibility to do so has never been greater. And because the universe is a conscious, intelligent thing, it has provided us with unprecedented access to catalysts and techniques that that facilitate this absolutely necessary growth. And so the short answer to why am I doing what I'm doing is that these are tremendously powerful tools. The adepts, what they have compiled for us in the writings and the teachings of the mysteries, what the shamans are contributing from the jungles and the plants and even the chemical entheogenic substances and compounds. If we make the choice to take the reins of our own evolution and make it a conscious process, we have the capacity to do so in a way that is unprecedented in human history, as far as we know, because of the access to information that we have and the understanding of psychedelics. For example, I still see this all the time. You'll tell people that you can cure addictions with psychedelics, and they make that asinine laughing face, the emoji on Facebook. Um, because there are still a tremendous number of people that find all this absolutely ridiculous because they have no understanding of neurophysiology. They have no understanding of they haven't looked at the research, and so that that sucks. But we're making tremendous headway all the time. Another one thing that I wanted to mention before we move on to some of the other questions. Um, is that the current chaostrophe, as I refer to it, is very threatening in a lot of ways. And I know that a lot of us have trouble seeing a way forward from here. The possibility that the conspiracy theorists are right and that the New World Order is impending, and um, the possibility of failure. We have to be real. We're not guaranteed anything. I don't think in the universe. I think the likelihood that order is guiding and is aligned with life as its purpose gives us we're leaning towards the likelihood that we're going somewhere that makes sense ultimately, I guess. But I think that one of the positives to come out of this chaos and fear and uncertainty is that it is revealing a tremendous amount, if you're paying attention, about human psychology, about the effects of indoctrination, both political and religious. I see all the time manifestations of the cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance and selective perception that allows our society to be such a calamitous disaster. For example, you see like right wingers posting all this patriotic stuff all the time, but if you confront them and say, well, look, wars have only been fought for corporate profit, and they say, well, yeah, that's been true for 50 years. And why are you still saying support the military? And if you also see them saying, well, the left is all evil, they want to destroy everything, and they're posting all this stuff about how we should still say the Pledge of Allegiance. And it's like, okay, well, if that's not just purely about creating nationalism for the point or for the purpose of having mindless automatons that just follow blindly whatever the government tells them to, shouldn't you be trying to create some kind of unity with the left rather than, and there's literally, when you confront people about this kind of stuff, there is no evidence that there has been any cognition in regards to any of it. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to see the level of work that needs to be done, how bad the situation actually is, and to also take some solace in the fact that we do have the tools to remedy all this and hopefully bring our culture into some sort of homeostasis. The potential for revolutionizing the world is incredibly. It's an amazing time to be alive, and I think that anyone that has studied Hermeticism or that just understands the fundamental workings of the universe, pressure creates diamonds, chaos precedes order. Uh, the more I think about it, it does make sense. There's not as a grain of sand in the universe that's out of place. I think sometimes in regards to all this. Yes, thank you. Okay, so uh, another person asked me, what is up with all the conspiracy stuff and the right wingers in the plant medicine community, and what happened there? And I actually can answer that very succinctly. Um, the reality is that the New Age channelers, in order to to substantiate their channel information, they collect world events. And in order to create the perception that the being Saint Germain or the Ascended Masters or the Pleiadian aliens or Melchizedek or whatever it is that they're supposedly channeling actually have everything under control, they have to put it all in the context of being part of some plan. So Donald Trump is a prophet and he's the reincarnation of Saint Germain. You hear that a lot. The forces of darkness are almost totally expelled from the planet. And so what has happened is that the right wing and the New Agers in the United States, and this is happening all over the world actually. I've known Australians, people from Norway. I don't know why it is that everyone is, they don't live in the United States, so it's weird. But that's basically how that started to happen. And it's, everything is a double-edged sword. It does introduce a lot of flakiness. It's one of the reasons I think why in the plant medicine community, I know shamans, for example, that used to be like really authentic. The Icaros were like languages channeled from another dimension. They weren't in Spanish. They weren't in Czech or even Shuar, wherever the shaman was from. They were legit like interdimensional consciousness, extremely powerful, and the pressure to conform to the expectations of people that are used to like this sort of like yuppie ayahuasca industry has completely ruined their ceremonies. So it's definitely, I can see why people are frustrated with it. And then how that translates into the plant medicine community is that, anything that falls under the banner of spirituality, there's going to be some overlap. So these New Agers that have kind of been influenced by this absolutely ridiculous political kind of mindfuckery that is happening in the United States, that has overlapped into the plant medicine community because, the New Ager kind of thing is kind of trendy and popular, and so is ayahuasca, and so the worst of this stuff kind of just has like become intertwined. And but yeah, I think that's the answer to that question. I never thought I would see the day. And one of the most mind-blowing elements of it is that the right-wing influence, these people are fundamentally fundamentalist Christians. And the New Age movement, and they hate it when you say this, but it's absolutely true. All you have to do is a little bit of research. The idea of the New Age comes from the New Aeon. Crowley was definitely leaning towards, he definitely used a lot of satanic aesthetic, at least. Blavatsky is another person that was a progenitor. I don't know if that's can that be feminine? But she was one of the people who a lot of the stuff that is practiced in the New Age, it grew out of Blavatsky. Blavatsky was even an influence on Crowley, and I have no issue with it at all because I don't think that these Luciferians, at least, were dark or evil at all. In fact, the mystical interpretation that inspires a lot of people to embrace those Luciferian writers is that Lucifer is really just a metaphor for consciousness, and that Christianity actually demonized consciousness as a way to create a pacifist, mind-controlled mass of, very easy to manipulate, ignorant masses. And the Roman consulate papers were uncovered in 2013 that it's the plan to create this religion in order to do what I just described. But and Blavatsky's publishing company was actually originally called Lucifer Publishing. And I'll give you guys one quick example of something that happened in my own life that is very reflective of this kind of ludicrousness. I mean, if I'm going to accept a spiritual tradition as like my fundamental belief system that's going to define my relationship with reality. I want to know where it came from, right? I'm going to do a little bit of research. And what you find with New Agers and Wiccans, are even worse, is that they don't have the clue. An example, a girl is very much into the New Age. I was working with her, and she gave me. I brought up Crowley for some reason, and she said, "Oh, his magic is evil. I would never practice that stuff. It's blah blah blah." And then like 20 minutes later, she's leaving, and I said, "Well, what are you going to do after work?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to do the Star Sapphire ritual. I'm going to perform the Star Sapphire, which was written by Crowley." But the New Age they just take things from Blavatsky and Crowley and these other people that they don't necessarily want to credit, and in a lot of cases they don't even bother to change the name of the rituals. And so, point being that to see the integration of the New Age with the Christian right wing, considering it's like basically Luciferianism. I mean, I don't know that these New Agers realize that most of those fundamentalist Christians would literally burn them alive as witches if they thought they could get away with it. So I do think that it's a very dangerous and unfortunate situation. This goes back to what I was talking about earlier about how using the plant medicine to enhance our neurological networks, right? This is what the part about being conscious means. It means that you are training the mind constantly to monitor for cognitive bias, for selective perception. A very good exercise that you can practice during meditation to help with this is to intentionally generate the opposite of any idea and then try to extract a third thing. This is alchemical thinking, very powerful practice. And this is what we have to work on. I mean, we have to stop. There's this tendency to reject knowledge that doesn't pander to our prejudices, and that's got to stop. I think also one of the difficulties is that political correctness can be almost like a propaganda engine, because people feel like it's inappropriate to confront people that might be promoting toxic ideologies. Because you want to respect people's beliefs, you don't want to insult people. But I think that we do need to be more confrontational, and we do need to take the bull by the horns because, for example, if you tell people that Zeus is not real, no one gets offended. But, I mean, we have solid evidence now that Jesus was created by the Roman consulate in order to create sheep. And if you tell people that, then you're a very, very mean person. And so we have to find ways to transcend this because, point of fact, like it or not, if lies or falsehoods are always going to have a negative impact. And when we feel like we are precluded from speaking the truth because we're worried about how it's going to infect people that have embraced falsehood, we're doing a disservice to ourselves, to that person, to humanity. And so I think that we are in a position now that we can have a spiritual dimension without abandoning reason and science and the modern ontological model can be integrated into something that bears at least a resemblance to a spiritual reality, because the crisis of purpose that we are struggling with globally right now, that is leading to the destruction of the rainforest, and the suicides amongst adolescent girls in the United States have spiked like 200% in the last 10 years or something. Pre-adolescents didn't used to kill themselves ever, and I was just if you guys have seen what was that social media documentary, they're talking about this. And they're blaming social media, and I think that's part of it. But it's a crisis of purpose that is partly due to the influence of abject atheism and determinism, where we're not connected with the reality that we are avatars of a greater mind. Our only purpose is to experience the universe on behalf of this consciousness, and I think just that simple understanding, that little bit of gnosis, would be enough to transform the world considerably. And I think it can be demonstrated to the satisfaction of nearly anyone, at least to the extent that they would be willing to consider it as a possibility. Because for the first time that I'm aware in modern history, we have the potential to embrace a sort of a spiritual disposition that does not require us to believe in anything that supersedes or negates science or natural law or just that doesn't fall within the parameters of possibility. And this is very powerful, and it's something that it's the antidote to the atom bomb. And I time to spread our wings, you know. Okay, so existential dread. Let's go on to that one. One of you guys asked me, you know, if we are this infinite consciousness, and that eventually we will all experience everything from every different possibility. That can be extremely threatening and depressing. And partly that's a matter of perspective, because are you going to look at it like, you know, the glass is half full or the glass is half empty? And the implication, of course, is that you know, somebody like Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead, I always use him as a reference when I'm talking about this, because, you know, he's adopted into one of the wealthiest families in the United States in the Bay Area right as the 60s were taking off. He gets into the Grateful Dead at age 15, and he's been, you know, a rock star since he was a little kid, almost. What the hell karmically did this guy do to you know, but the implication is that as far as you rise, because all of the laws that govern creation govern all systems, right? It's not just like mountains and, you know, trees that grow tall and then they fall and die, or, you know, that whole thing of going up and coming down. It also applies to the dynamics of our experience. And so Bob Weir has this amazing you know, like really easy, blissful, incredible experience in this life. But that's only because in the last life he paid for it, or he's going to pay for it in the next life by being born into a leper colony in India as an orphan and starving to death in the street at age 9 or whatever. So I think that's kind of the gist of this question. And it is a tough one, you know. And it goes back to this sort of Gnostic idea of the Lucifer myth being consciousness, that nothing became conscious. And so this like the metaphor of the Garden of Eden, where the knowledge caused the fall, the descent of spirit into matter. And the reason that they say then that the devil is the source of all evil is because if we had remained in God, in eternity, in perfection, in nothingness, there would be no duality, there would be no evil, there would be no darkness. So it's not unfair to say that the devil is the source of all evil in that context. And so this question then becomes, was it worth it in order to have orgasms and rock music and oceans and cliffs and rainforests and all this variety and beauty and transcendental states of consciousness and all that, because every bit of it is paid for in suffering. And so how do you come to terms with all of that, especially knowing that ultimately it is just mathematics being expressed by energy and translated by consciousness. And so ultimately the equation balances and we just return to zero anyways. So there's like nothing gained ultimately to go through all of this. But you bought the ticket, you got to take the ride. And this is one of the reasons why, not asceticism exactly, but for example, if you practice like traditional forms of yoga where the goal is to get into very, very uncomfortable positions and to maintain them for very, very long periods of time, the objective is to become like he in whom suffering and glory are indistinguishable, which is a reference to the creator or the universal mind, so that you are able to experience without prejudice. And of course, that's easier said than done, but I think it does offer some peace of mind if you incorporate into your regimen of practice some element of suffering, basically, at least of significant discomfort that you are compelled to come to terms with. Um, but this sort of existential question is a bitch. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Um, so the only real advice I can give is that you just have to ask yourself, would you have preferred to remain in nothingness for all of eternity? Um, because that doesn't really sound great either. And when you are at the top of the mountain, be thankful. And those moments of joy, uh, do not um, do not be miserly with your gratitude. Dispense with it eagerly, and save your tears for when you really need to cry, um, because those times are just as sure as any other. Uh, so I hope that helps. Um, Also, before we move on from this one, because I think this is really important, one of my biggest beefs with what I would call like the pop culture trends in spirituality. This is something that you see a lot in the New Age community. Is that people are just like focused on the negative. This is not good. Enlightenment is a holistic understanding. This is part of the reason why all mystics find themselves in the dark night of the soul type of experience at some point, the crossing of the abyss, which can have many different meanings, but one that probably applies to every serious aspirant on the path is that there will be a time of borderline insanity, hopefully. We do lose some people sometimes to this process. Um, but it's very easy to understand why. It's just the mind. Um, just as I was saying earlier about the how the galaxies construct themselves just the same way that neuronal pathways do. Uh, just as we must have chaos in order to give birth to a new order, psychological states are the same, or levels of consciousness. And so, no matter what the tradition is, there are references to this, and it's something everyone's heard of this. William Blake and Aleister Crowley and all of these like great mystics. They all went nuts or close for some period of time, and so that's the crossing of the abyss. Shamans, as Terence McKenna said, is a madman who has healed himself, and that is part of the necessity. This isn't just some random process. There's purpose to all of it, and the reason for this breaking down, not only does it allow for the space, I guess, is our way to think about it, or the potential to reconfigure. Uh, the restructuring is something that the shaman or the healer must learn to do for himself, because then he understands the process in such a way that it enables him or facilitates his ability to help others in order to put themselves back together, because uh, not everyone has the same capacity for that sort of development. But what I was saying before I kind of went off on that rabbit hole is that this tendency to focus entirely on the light, it's not even necessarily that people are being dishonest, but it's very easy to have select perception, and to we are guilty of all sorts of wish demon compelled psychological gymnastics, and it's also very, very easy to sell people ideas that they want to believe. um, and so, this focus on light and totally ignoring any kind of dark element is not enlightenment, and it's not healing. And this is one of the reasons why, in New Age communities, I've noticed that a lot of the people that are supposed to be healers are so unbelievably damaged and imbalanced because of this. It's not a holistic understanding of the universe. They don't understand that that what they consider evil is actually just a necessary interplay of antinomies. I am not suggesting that we embrace evil or do evil, but I am saying that if you really want to have an elevated understanding, if you really are interested in increasing the oscillations of your consciousness, a holistic understanding of the constituent parts and energies of the universe is absolutely necessary. And so, it's partly about balance. I just wanted to mention that because, I was saying in regards to trying to transcend this existential crisis that this person had asked me about, it is important to stay positive, but not to the extent that you have this sort of lopsided perception of what the universe is. And I think that a lot of people are disappointed as they become more enlightened because they think that what they're heading for is some resolution of all of the conflict in their beings, and to transcend all the darkness in the universe. And I hate to be the bearer of, I don't think it's bad news, but a lot of people will take it that way. That's not what it is. That's just not what it is. It's an understanding. You will know why. You can understand why. For example, equal and opposite reaction. As I said earlier, these laws don't just apply to physical systems, they apply to all systems. Natural law governs all systems. And so, equal and opposite reaction, every bit of good generates evil, and every bit of evil generates good. And you can say, well, those are human subjective labels, but how could that possibly translate? Well, if it's true that the universe is fundamentally made of consciousness and it's a mind, if we can understand good and evil, so can the universe. And you can also just think of those with different labels if you prefer something less human. But ultimately, you're going to find that this is true. And I'm mentioning this in part because my own existential crisis was catalyzed in large part by that elevated understanding that as long as we are in this dualistic universe, anything good that you do is going to be balanced by its opposite. It's just always, there are equal amounts of antinomies, interplay of antinomies. I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say. The interplay of opposites in equal measure is it's what gives rise to the dimension of creation where we live until we die. And so this is another reason why I take issue with any time you hear a channeler or a teacher or any of these people say that we are ridding the planet of the forces of darkness. You know they are full of shit or delusional. It's never going to happen. Never going to happen. It's not meant to happen. It cannot happen. It will not happen. The laws of the universe are absolutely steady and reliable. It may be that we are on our way to different dimensions of consciousness, different realms of consciousness after death that are not bound by the strictures of the universal laws that this level of creation is. But as long as we're here on this plane, there's always going to be light and shadow in equal measure, and no one's ever going to stop it. And anyone that tells you otherwise, this is not a spiritual teacher. This is someone that is selling you something that they know you will pay to hear from them. That simple. And of course, anything I say could be complete bullshit, but that is one thing that I'm pretty confident about. Okay, and then so another thing along those lines is reincarnation. And this is something that happened today that was absolutely insane. Not that I'm surprised. You guys know that I talk about synchronicity a lot if you follow the channel. And like Jung said, it is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see it. And so I've been talking about doing this reincarnation reveal, and I'm actually bringing this up because when I was asking for questions, somebody said, what about the reincarnation reveal? So I decided I'll talk a little bit about that during this Q&A, even though I'm not going to do the reveal right now. But I think it's worthy of a little bit of setup. So earlier, I was trying to remember the details of some of the best cases of evidence for reincarnation that I feel like I've encountered. There's some guys in India that one of them, I think he had like a bullet hole, what seemed to be a bullet hole wound, a hole in the back of his skull that he was born with. And, he said, well, I was shot in the head, and he knew where the body was, and he knew who the guy that killed him was. And, that sort of thing that is just, it's like, okay, well, how do you explain that? Well, actually, I can't explain it without invoking reincarnation. But let's talk about what happened with this video first. So I was looking for stuff along those lines, and I found a video of these kids that were supposed to be making a very good case for reincarnation. And so I was also making notes in my notebook at the same time for this live stream, and I'm writing that the universe was communicating in coincidences to reveal my past life story. And I hear from the computer, okay, Harley, tell us your story. And I'm like looking around because that's my name for those of you that don't know. And that was the name of the kid in the video. I'm literally writing about how the universe reveals reincarnation stories through coincidence, and that happens. That's what the sentence says. Come on, you guys. Gosh. So, there's that. But I think that it's really important, and this is a really powerful thing if you can accept it. And it's one of those things that when you really want to believe something, I'll give you guys an example. Like, I've noticed, the history repeating itself is these patterns. And so when I was a teenager, I was like, okay, the 1960s, before that was the 1920s, where there was the flapper thing, and it was kind of a social cultural upheaval revolution kind of thing. And then the 60s, and I also figured that time seemed to be speeding up, or at least these patterns were cycling more quickly. And I also noticed that the one in the 20s didn't seem to quite be as dramatic as the 60s. And so I'm like, okay, so these are like the, what do you call it before an earthquake? The tremors. And then 2012 or thereabouts, maybe a little bit later, will be the big eruption, or at least a much larger one. And here we are, but I noticed something. I chose not to perceive the fact that after the 1920s came, for example, the 1950s. Ignorant, racist, white bread, plain, boring, just the absolute opposite of where the perceived revolution had been steering people, right? And then after the 60s, what happened? The 80s, the 70s, it progressively, equal and opposite reaction on the macrocosmic scale, because everything's governed by these same laws, right? But it's like when I started to see that I was correct and that it seemed to be happening again, I totally ignored the fact that after the 60s, the 70s, and 80s happened, and the first part of the 90s probably, before the 90s did start, that's where it kind of started to build again, I think. But you see what I'm saying? It's like we will reject knowledge that does not pander to our prejudices, and we will see what we want to see rather than actually seeing what is there. And I think with reincarnation, that is another thing, because I think most of us probably don't want to die. This is one of the reasons that religion can be sold so easily to people, and so profitably, and so universally. People want to live forever. And so reincarnation is one of those things, and I see, even some of the better teachers out there will say things like, the fact that energy cannot be destroyed proves that we are eternal. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't. I used to say that too. But it doesn't. It just doesn't. And that guy is extremely successful. He has a religion called Hyperianism. And I'm not saying that he's wrong, but I'm saying that when he says proves, he is being a salesman not really a great teacher of spirituality or metaphysics, right? Because it doesn't prove that just because our consciousness is energy, that's called lunatic logic. He's making this gigantic leap. And if you scroll through the comments, everyone believes it. They're not questioning anything because he's selling them exactly what they want to hear. And I think it's much healthier. I know it's much healthier to consider that as like, okay, that's like anecdotal or circumstantial evidence that it's at least possible that there is continuity of consciousness, but it's not proof. And one of the things I noticed when I was doing this research on reincarnation is that the overwhelming majority of convincing cases of children, part of the premise of this is that kids haven't forgotten yet, right? And so, and also I think just the sheer amount of incoming signals and information, the brain is going to bury shit, you know. But geneticists have proven beyond question that we are capable of recalling the memories of our ancestors. So in my own case, I had the same breakfast habits as this person in the universe seemed to be revealing to me, that I had been in a previous life. I did the same drugs. I smoked the exact type of obscure tobacco and only that tobacco. My life mission was identical. I knew the person's books like the back of my hand. Like I could literally recite entire paragraphs that I had never read before. The gematria, the numerical value of my name, he whom is this person in question, right? I could go on and on. I'll save it for the video, but it was like, what in the actual fuck is going on here? And but I'm English, so is this person. The common relative is possible, and so once again, the possibility of just genetic memory is totally. All I need is a common ancestor. And so, in the case of most of these children, it was like this one like Chinese kid was remembering all this stuff that only his father's father would know for sure. I believe the guy. I don't think he was making it up. I mean, he seemed genuinely freaked out, you know. But this is again possibly genetic memory. And then I started looking at all of these other cases where somebody remembered the details of a murder, or you know, they knew all of these details of all of this, a relative necessarily. Every single one of them were in very, very small villages in India where probably everyone is related. All of them. So it's just, I think one of the most important things I'm trying to offer here is that when we hear something that we can construe as evidence of something that we want to believe, we'll just jump on it. Like, oh, wow, there's proof. No, no. And we have to, if you really want knowledge, if you really want to evolve spiritually, you have to have the same respect for it that a physicist does for mathematics. Any discipline, which would include spiritual advancement, is going to have this same degree of potential for technical development, or you know what I'm saying? Like you just as there are musicians of varying degrees of technical capacity. Or mathematicians or whatever, it's the same thing. And I think that one of the unfortunate consequences of our cultural degradation of our respect for the office of the shaman or the mystic is that we do not have the respect for the capacity that is really required to navigate the metaphysical, the spiritual. So, you know, I think that letting go of knowing with certainty, only the madman is absolutely sure, will it will accelerate our learning, and it will also, if we can somehow make it like a cultural cornerstone or a tendency that is more universal. This is why conspiracy theories thrive, and I'm not a person that says that they're all wrong. I seriously doubt it. I mean, the idea that we have concentrated the wealth among 1% and that these people aren't conspiring to manipulate that. I mean, there's so much obvious propaganda in social media and all over the media. Obviously, I mean, it's completely stupid to think that there are not conspiracies. Completely dumb. But it's almost as dumb to believe that you know what's going on unless you're actually involved in the conspiracies, right? So it's this fear. It's the same reason that people adopt doctrinal religions. You know, they believe in these like Mick religion, pre-packaged, pre-prepared systems that are actually there to preclude genuine spiritual experience. It's this desire to know that is not really possible. Everything is symbolic, right? So the idea that the illusion and the serpent or the old dragon, like these are kind of connected concepts in a lot of different mystical traditions. The forked tongue of the serpent, I think, is a good illustration of what happens when you follow these metaphysical ideas. Never once have I come to an absolute point. It always lies like the forked tongue of a serpent. You can come to two possibilities, but that's the end of the road, in my opinion, or the crossroad where the devil exists, because there's no penetrating the mystery past a certain point with any kind of certainty. And reincarnation is a good illustration of that. Even if the possibility of a common ancestor can be precluded from a certain scenario, a certain situation, that still doesn't prove reincarnation. It could be the collective mind. I have received all kinds of information out of nowhere that was very specific, that was true, that I couldn't possibly have known. But I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's a matter of actual spirit guides. I don't know if the mind just has the capacity to tune into a higher mind and extract information. I think that's very likely.